Professor Ruth Watkyn is this year's Goldstick speaker. She is a president of the University of Utah and a professor of communication science and disorder. Professor Watkins spent 20 years here at the University of Illinois as a faculty member in the Department of Speech and Hearing Science, vice provost, and the dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Science. She has collaborated with many faculty and people here and have many friends and been mentor for many people here in the audience. And we are very thrilled that she was able to come here back to campus. Professor Watkins' scholarship focuses on communication development and disability in young children. She has received funding from numerous agencies and foundations to support her research, and she's widely recognized for her excellence in teaching and in scholarship in the field of communication disorder. So please join me in welcoming Professor Ruth Watkins.
Thank you. What a delight to be back on this campus with so many familiar friends, faces from my home department in speech and hearing science, many people that have helped me along the way from special education, the campus broadly, Alumni Association, Foundation. It's just, hey, good to see you. What a privilege to be back on this campus. I'm honored and delighted, and I want to particularly acknowledge the Goldstick family. Phil and Beverly have done remarkable things on this campus, transformative things on this campus, and their family, and what a privilege for me to be part of this day. I think as I read about the vision that Phil and Beverly had, I read that the vision was to help children and families in a tangible way. And I want to assure you that what I have seen today in how this effort has matured over the years is absolutely helping children and families in tangible ways. It's a remarkable thing. One of the things I got to do today was meet with two Goldstick fellows, James and Laura. Where are you, James and Laura? These are the current Goldstick fellows. Would you stand up and we'll clap for you? Remarkable. Both of them talked with me about what the funding is doing for them, what it's enabling, about their interests in parent-child interactions, about communication, about social development, and what might be possible. It was very enjoyable to spend some time with them, and it gives me great hope for the future of what's going to happen with communication disabilities, interventions, creative efforts that really are going to change people's lives. So I think the mission of what you set out to accomplish is absolutely happening here without question. It's really an honor to be able to join you. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about something a bit different. As I look at the speakers that have been here in the past, they are people who are working day to day in the field of communication disability and interventions. I have a little different lens now. I don't get to do that very much anymore, but it does bring me into contact with different ideas and different parts of an institution that I personally think have great promise for advancing knowledge and extending interventions and treatments in a broader way that will ultimately help many people with disabilities and people with communication disabilities. So in a broad level, I want to talk about policies, strategies, and practices that I think hold great promise for advancing study, knowledge, intervention, treatment, and improving lives for people with disabilities. And this is not without a little bit of controversy, so I expect a good bit of participation and some maybe some entertaining dialogue and questions, which is good. It'll make it more interesting. I think we have, many of us in public higher education and who work in fields related to disabilities have relied very heavily for a long time on public funding, on government support of one kind or another, state, local, federal support. And very important, and it will continue to be very important. There's also, I think, enormous it's so fun when I see people I recognize. It's great. Good to see you. I think we will be able to do more, in my view, if we can leverage private capital in creative and innovative ways. And that's really what I want to talk about today. Now, do not misunderstand for a minute with some different strategies and practices that I think this will be a substitute for federal funding or for state funding, but I do think it can help move things along more quickly. And that's really what I want to talk about. What's the role of the public research university? I think the role of the public research university is advancing change, trying new models, testing these approaches and interventions, and really thinking about how we make a difference in the lives of children and families. And I've had the opportunity to do that with some policies and practices and strategies that the role that I have and the roles I've had at the University of Utah have given me an opportunity to try in some new ways. With really, I don't do a lot of the work day to day. I get to help other people do the work in a different way, in different scales. Now this is the one slide where you have to listen to a small University of Utah infomercial. All right, so this is a public research university's progress. This is something we have been working on very hard. 2013, where the University of Utah was. Big public flagship university with a remarkably low graduation rate of 60%. Not a good place for a public research university to be, not where we want it to be. We have worked very, very hard on producing change at the University of Utah. So a lot of what I'm talking about today is about how do you mobilize and lead people towards change and help make things happen. 2018, the University of Utah has moved its graduation rate up 10 percentage points in that 5-year period, which is pretty remarkable in terms of removing a 6-year graduation rate. Federal faculty awards and prizes up dramatically. Look at the federal research dollars. Big jump. So this is a story about change in an institution that's happening at all levels of what the institution's mission are. And how do we produce that kind of change? That's just hoping that that mountain keeps climbing over the next 5. All right, so what I want to ask you about is how you think you can lead change and advance knowledge in areas particularly related to disabilities and communication disabilities. I've had the joy today of talking to lots of people who are trying to do this with some really great ideas about what they would like to do to produce change. Hedda. I told Hedda you don't have to participate. Hedda did not wish to participate. But one of the interesting discussions that we had today, and Hedda and James are both working on this, right? The idea that using technology, tech platforms, tech assistance, they might be able to help families with young kids with communication disabilities and challenging behavior understand. The parents can log in, summarize what the challenging behavior is, get some feedback through technology assistance about what communication function might be being played with that, and start to think about how interventions could happen that would support and help that. What a remarkable thing with the advance of technology to be able to provide direct assistance to families with young kids with disabilities, behavior and communication challenges, to understand the functions of those behaviors and to understand something about what they could do about it and where they could get some assistance. Pretty remarkable idea, made possible by innovative ideas and driving change. I think there are lots of other people in the room, lots of them that I talked to today, with some ideas about what they would like to do. I think we all have a deep awareness of how important communication is in quality of life. I know I do. And I'll tell you when I first learned this. And I was very interested that the 2013 Goldstick speaker was Julianne Woods. Julianne Woods and I have a long past. It's kind of interesting. Maybe I'll go up here for a while so I can see people a little bit better. How did I wind up where I am? It's kind of an interesting question. We wonder often how this happens. But as an undergraduate, I had a hard time figuring out what I wanted to do. I actually transferred twice. This is not the path of a typical university president. I'll just acknowledge that. And I also quit school for a year as an undergraduate. Just absolutely unheard of, people that wind up being provosts and university presidents. And when the year that I quit school, first I was camp counselor, which was a great idea until about November. Not a good idea anymore. And then I went to work in a school And I actually worked with Julianne Woods, who was a Goldstick speaker 5 or 6 years ago. This is kind of remarkable, actually. And this was in a little tiny town in Iowa, rural area. And what happened during that time is that I learned a whole lot about the power and importance of communication for quality of life, working with young kids with disabilities with communication difficulties in particular. And what happened for me during that time was that I could see how very important effective communication was going to be in quality of life, and really became passionate about understanding that better and making some important efforts towards trying to advance knowledge to improve communication. And I think about that interesting arc of the Goldstick lecture and the role that Julianne had in helping me see an area of passion. And in one way or another, I have been able to work in relationship to communication and quality of life over this now very long time span, because that was quite a long while ago. I want to talk really about two things today. I want to talk about some processes that I think can lead to policy changes, and then I'm going to talk about some strategies and techniques that I think can really advance change. And some of the folks here were in a discussion that we had earlier this morning where we talked about some of those strategies. So I'm going to try to give you chances to participate and jump in as well. So on the process side, now I'm going to tell you some things that are, I talked about the change process in Utah, but now I'm going to tell you one that's not so good. So in Utah, the nation, full-day kindergarten hardly seems like a novel thing, right? In the state of Utah, only 1 of every 4 kids participates in full-day kindergarten. In fact, kindergarten is actually optional in Utah. You do not have to send your children to kindergarten. And the access to full-day kindergarten. So when I first went to Utah and started to engage with things in the community, I thought, well, given my background, I'll work hard with people in this community to think about expanding early childhood education, birth to 5. And lo and behold, I was to discover that it was going to be pretty hard to have people in early education and then say, well, when you're 5, good luck. There's not a full-day kindergarten for you to go to. So I began to think about how you build support and processes of change in a different way, because what I thought was going to be what we worked on wasn't going to be what we worked on in this broader aspect of communication development. So this was a good learning experience for me, and I just want to kind of offer this up as a little bit of an example. And that is the idea that traditional collaboration might not get us where we need to go. That really large-scale social change for people with disabilities, large-scale change in society is going to require broader cross-sector collaboration. And when we stay isolated in various silos, we will be able to get much less done. Now, today when I first talked to the group this morning I guess Jim was the facilitator of that class. Jim said something like, wow, when we first came in, it looked like all the speech and hearing people were going to sit over here and all the special educators were going to sit over here. And for most of us, for much of our career, we have celebrated collaborations from speech and hearing and special education and other kinds of educators and other support personnel. What I'm trying to convince you of today is that we ought to work a little harder to be even bigger than that, cross-sector efforts. If we really want to produce policy change and big influences at scale for people with disabilities, we need to get a lot more people involved and a lot more people working together. So I'm going to just tell you a quick story about that, and then I'll go to another effort. So this is something we talked about earlier today too. We need to act our way into a new way of thinking instead of thinking our way into a new way of acting. So isolated impact by discipline, speech and hearing, special education. Then we begin to think, okay, we're collaborating, that's a good thing. What about thinking about collective impact? Collective impact is a model that says, let's get a lot of people involved in this. Business, industry, governmental leaders, educators, special educators, speech and hearing scientists. And let's really think about how we could produce change together. Not in disciplinary silos, but in cross sector interactions and impact. And if you go back to that problem of access to kindergarten and early childhood special education, you can start to imagine this. So when I first, not too long after I came to Utah, the United Way asked me to lead what they called a Promise Partnership Council. And of course I said I would do it, because that's what you're supposed to do when you're a university leader, right? Be part of your community, particularly a public university. And then they told me what a Promise Partnership was. And a Promise Partnership was, I was gonna have the opportunity to work with 8 or 10 people and work on this problem of early childhood education, of access to services for people with disabilities. And I was thinking, okay, I can do this. My discipline has prepared me. And then they told me who my 8 or 10 people were gonna be. And my 8 or 10 people were the owner of the largest car dealership in Utah, the governor's education expert, a special educator, a speech pathologist, philanthropists, a family philanthropy group, and the owner, the CEO of a trucking company, a transportation service. And in my mind I thought, oh my, what have I gotten myself into? I think that I know how to lead in a university. I kind of think I know how to work a little bit with my friends in special education. I feel like I understand the subject matter expertise, at least somewhat, as far as early education. How do you begin to approach change and making change at a large scale with a group of people so very different? Big scale philanthropy, big scale business and industry owners who probably don't know a whole lot about disability, got legislators, governmental leaders, to really come together to produce change. And I have to say that this has been kind of an interesting and powerful journey, because it's the thing that actually produced change after years and years in our fields of not being able to produce change. So a very powerful lesson. Now, that team of people met frequently over time. We did have backbone staff from the United Way who did a lot of work between meetings. That's important to say, because a lot of these folks would come in, add expertise, bring other people along, talk to all the influential people that they knew. In a way, it began to help me realize that you need a little bit of the subject matter expertise and the content, but what you really need are people who can move change in communities, in states, in government, and that could take us to a much more powerful place. So I think these are some Promise Partnership teams working, and it's just a fascinating thing to have a school superintendent, a philanthropist, an early childhood educator, a parent child educator, all trying to work and looking at the people around those. That's a little bit of an example of the different types, the numbers of people that participated in this change process. The roadmap that was laid out at the beginning, the part that I worked on was kindergarten readiness, access kindergarten readiness, but each one of those little dots is a team. So there was another team working on third grade reading, another on health, another on graduation, another on participation in post-secondary ed, which would have been, I thought, a lot better fit for me. But in fact, change really happened through that process. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. And then you can start to think about producing cross-sector teams that could drive change where you work and what you do. One of them is that, and remember, Utah is a smaller state. There's 3 million people in Utah, big geographic area, right? We were able to produce a situation where every single incoming kindergarten student took the same kindergarten readiness test at the beginning and the end of the year. Every single school district in the state agreed to do the same thing. Really helped us power up understanding data, people, and what the needs are. And that's just kind of unheard of. We're all sort of used to being out there doing our own thing the way we want to. Very powerful agents of change. Also, the governor's office took this up, early childhood as the edX challenge, they called it. So they want to improve the quality of instruction in pre-K, extended time, early start. So what began to happen is that the roadmap that this group of people produced, with the influence, the relationships that they all have in very different areas, to mobilize government, state investment in change and in really advancing knowledge. So that's one example on the process side. Now I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about some strategies that attract investment. So the topic here is shifting over to thinking about how do we get financial investments that help us leverage change. Financial investments from the private sector in public-private kind of partnerships that help move things forward. And whatever you do and wherever you work, you can imagine a little bit about this. So Brad, where'd Brad go? There's Brad. Brad is doing this. That was very good that you're here today, because as you think about what you're bringing to work with individuals with autism, you're looking at private capital kinds of investments that can help you develop services that are effective, extend services, and really produce change. Advance knowledge, bring more services to more people, and really produce change in this field. So I'm going to talk a little bit about social impact investing. How many people in here have heard of social impact investing? Or are you scared to raise your hands? You may be called on. I promise not to do that. So what is social impact investing? Social impact investing at a broad level is financing tools that leverage private capital with public investments to produce social good. Social good might be more kids ready for school, employment for individuals with autism. There are many different ways you could think about social good, but it's the task of bringing private capital into the mix. Most of us here are used to working with public funding. Private capital and new partnerships can help us bring more services, innovate, do more, make more effective change, and that social impact investing can happen in a variety of ways. I'm going to give a few examples today. Some of the examples are what's called social impact bonding. So that's definite bonding in investments that really help accelerate change. Pay for success is a very typical kind of social impact financing. Many of us in early childhood are used to pay for success models, and there's several that are happening in Chicago right now. So we're going to talk about a few of those. There are also just attracting investors to really good ideas. So Hedda and James, as they work on their app that's going to bring assistance for individuals with challenging behavior and communication challenges, scaling that up. If they have to work on this on their own with funding that Jim is apparently not going to provide from the College of Education, sorry, Jim. I'm sure Jim would support them. This is going to both take a long time and not be very scalable. So what's the solution for them to scale up and to be able to work more quickly and bring an effective intervention to more people? It's some access to private capital. Might be investment. There's straight up investment. There's a variety of ways that could work. There's one other example that I want to give, and that's the power of prizes and competition to bring forward good ideas and to make change. So I have an idea for Phil and family. If they want to create the Goldstick prize, I think a lot of good ideas would come from that. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So some examples. And I wanted to, part of the reason that I have had the opportunity to learn and think more about this is that the Sorensen Impact Center is located on the University of Utah campus. It's part of the David Eccles School of Business. And it is all about private equity coming to make social good. What is called here a double bottom line return. You make an investment, you're hoping for a financial return. Social impact investing is hoping for a double bottom line, a financial return and social change on an issue of importance in education, in health, a variety of fields, right? So that's the double bottom line social impact investing idea. And the Sorensen Center is doing that in areas like infants and toddlers with disabilities, but then you can see other examples, affordable housing, homelessness. We talked about a number of areas earlier today. Other ways that philanthropy and investment can help drive social change. So some examples of how that is and how that works. And here's my hope today, that all of you creative inventors out there all of you people with good ideas, give some thought to whether this kind of model could help move your good idea forward about change, about support for individuals with disability, about communication, effectiveness, and disabilities. Because having watched this, now the advantage of being old is that you have seen 30 years worth or more of what's happened in your field or what has not happened in your field. And I think effective programs and effective interventions would really benefit from the accelerant that comes from private investments in some areas. Now, that's not to say this is without some challenges, so I'll give you some examples and how some of these things work. Oh, this, I believe, is just a short video that's going to give an overview of social impact funding and some of the ideas.
Many of the migrants are Rohingya Muslims.
The uncertainty of Brexit.
These days, global progress seems eclipsed by social problems. It can be easy to despair and tempting to tune out. But at Sorensen Impact, we're committed to catalyzing hope. We've collaborated with the White House, top financiers, the British Parliament, and even the Vatican to find answers. We know the solutions are out there. Big ideas in New Delhi, Nairobi, New York. So we scour the earth to find daring nonprofits, innovative governments, and socially focused businesses. Then we empower them to become sustainable, scalable, impactful. Our investments are bringing electricity to low-income homes in India and internet to remote classrooms in Africa. Our partnerships are opening doors for children to attend transformative preschools and drug users to enter proven treatment programs. We challenge governments to look at the causes of social problems, collaborate across sectors to build solutions, and then measure if they actually work. We are the bold brainchild of social pioneer Jim Sorensen, championing his vision of doing well while doing good. At our headquarters, ideas collide among investors, data scientists, policy experts, academics, and students. Since 2013, we've invested more than $100 million, empowered over 300 social entrepreneurs, and mentored hundreds of future leaders. To learn more, visit www.sorensenimpact.com.
Okay. There's also a brief video clip that Forbes did about social impact investing that's quite good. And I think if you wanted to learn more, that's a good place to go for a quick overview. So this is just a snapshot of projects around the country that in one way or another are supported by the Sorensen Impact Center. It can be financial support, it can be technical assistance, it can be a variety of ways. And you'll see the sectors there that are represented. So social impact funding in one way or another is making a pretty significant difference in education, in health, in some creative projects around the country. There are also areas that are less related to our topic today that you can also see up there. But I'm going to talk, there's one dot in the middle, it's in Kansas City, about a project called In Return Strategies that is about employment for adults with disabilities. I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about how that financial model works, and that's a good example of an investor project. And before I do that, I'm going to talk about a couple of other models. This is a little bit of a snapshot of impact investing and really thinking about the investment spectrum. Now, I think virtually everyone in here is familiar with straight up grants. How many people in this room have had a grant? Written a grant, been part of a grant, funded by a grant, right? A whole lot of us in one way or another. We're much more accustomed in the academy to grant funding. Great idea, I'm going to take my idea out, I'm going to get a federal agency to support and invest my scholarship and my work or my training, and I'm going to deliver a project with straight up grants. As you begin to look across the other end of the spectrum, we also know that there are plenty of places where you invest, probably most of us that are invested in one way or another in the stock market or other things, where we're not looking necessarily to have a social impact, we want a financial return. We'd like to retire someday, and we're thinking about the revenue that we'll need for that. So in the middle, you have the impact investing options that are available. And social finance, we don't have to go into all the details to understand that there are a variety of models and tools for making investments that drive social change, that do social good, that help individuals with disabilities in employment, that provide a pay-for-success model in some cases. I'm going to talk about a few of those. Utah was one of the first places that a pay-for-success model for pre-K education happened. I did not have anything to do with this. I arrived at about the time it started. But the reason I wanted to talk about this is it's a pretty straightforward social impact financing kind of model that I think people will understand pretty well. Who are the investors? This is preschool education, which is designed to meet the needs of kids with communication development, disabilities, difficulties, children who in this study were called at risk, which I recognize is not the most friendly terminology, but it's the terminology that was used. The investors were Goldman Sachs and a second investor who should look very familiar to you all. I believe he's your governor. And now our governor, I'll say that, use the right pronouns. So they made the investment, so remember, this is financial tools that bring private capital to drive change. The intermediary there, the United Way of Salt Lake, and who's going to pay for success is the state of Utah in this case and Salt Lake County. So the model is we're providing high quality pre-K education for kids who may be at risk for difficulties, some identified with. The private equity capital provided, and the model is, how does that get repaid? It gets repaid if fewer students need special education services in first grade, second grade, third grade. That's how the investor gets repaid. When the investor joins in a model like this, there is no guarantee that they will be repaid. So that's part of how this all worked, was generally your capital is at risk. Not all models are like that, but this one was like that. So the resources go to preschool provision. The measurement happens K1, 2, 3, those years. If there is a reduction in demand for special education services, the private equity investors get paid annually. There's a payment. There's an external evaluator that has to be independent, and they make the payments back according to a model that's built. Now, what's right about this and what can go wrong with this as you look at this? Well, the private equity capital is at risk, right? Other ideas about any questions, comments? What seems right to you about this and what seems wrong to you about this? Any thoughts? That's too hard of a question, maybe. I will tell you, this was not a perfect project. It was an early effort at really thinking about how do we bring private capital to make a difference in a state that has too little pre-K education. All that was very positive. The somewhat more controversial elements were that children were served who were not at risk necessarily for a disability. They might have been at risk, though, for being overdiagnosed. There were children in this pool who were English as a second language learners. So it's a little bit of an imperfect model for everybody who's in this field. You know that those children are it would be like sending me to France and saying that I had a disability. I don't speak French, but actually I'm a pretty good language user for the most part. So the model worked brilliantly. There was much less than predicted use of special education services. Speech language pathology service use was reduced. But the challenge, I think, was to make sure that kids are assessed in their first language would be a good idea for the future. So there's a little bit of a twist. The model has worked pretty well. There's been a lot of publicity about this. It's been written about in the New York Times. It's been a lot of places. It's a good basic place to look at a social impact bond in the pay for success area. It has also, this is probably the best outcome of all, it's led the state to support pre-K education at a big scale, which is maybe the very best thing that happened, so that more kids can get service, with the idea that you have very strong ROI on those early investments. There's a lot of detail there about the model and about how it worked. We'll skip over that. Here's another one that's happening in Chicago. Again, you can see some of the same funders that are helping make that happen. This is parent-child social impact bonding. How do we get more services to birth to 3 and birth to 5-year-old kids using private capital? With the payback that there's less need for services in Chicago public schools. In the city of Chicago, they have to spend less money. So it's an upfront financing that provides more service through private capital, reduces the need for communication disability services and special education later. Now, what we're skipping over is the incredible positive impact for young kids who get on a much better path to early education. All right, I'm going to talk about an example for adults or young adults with disabilities as they make the transition from school to work. This is a very difficult area. So this model is in Kansas City called In Return Strategies. In Return Strategies is designed to help employers who want to employ people with disabilities and give them access to talent for people with disabilities, communication disabilities, developmental disabilities, a variety of disabilities, autism, and help produce a stream of employment. Why do employers want to employ people with disabilities? They tend to be great employees. They tend to stay. It's a recruitment investment that pays off for the company. Societally, we want people with disabilities to have jobs, self-esteem, productivity in life, entering the tax base, being independent, all kinds of reasons. So it's a partnership that works very well. How does this model work? The In Return Strategies is a really, I think, powerful and effective model. And Sorensen Impact Center actually made a private investment in this. So this works a little bit differently in terms of moving capital into this investment. So this is a technology-based portal. You'll sense a theme here that technology is a big part, where an employer, think Costco, County Market, big Kroger, actually those are real examples, the Costco and Kroger part. County Market I just threw in for the locals. I had trouble remembering today what the grocery stores were here, which is very strange. But County Market, I think, is a pretty big employer, right? So they want to employ people with disabilities. They have workforce needs. People with disabilities are good employees. They stay, they work in the company, they succeed, they thrive. They have a hard time accessing people. They don't naturally have access to a talent pool. I will also say that those big companies get a tax credit that gives them an incentive to employ people with disabilities, and we have sort of general federal guidelines that tell us about 7% of your employee pool should be people with disabilities. So the recruiting firms have a lot of incentive. There's also, in many places, access providers. Access providers, in this particular case, in In-Return Strategies, were Developmental Disabilities Council of Johnson County, for example. Other access providers, Division of Workforce Services, that are actually trying to help people find their way to employment. How come there's this breakdown? Because lots of access providers, and what are they supposed to do? Reach out and contact Costco, County Market, Kroger. It's a very inefficient system. So the tech portal allows matching the recruiter, the firm that's looking, with the talent base on a tech portal. Everybody wins when this works. Now, how does the investor get the private equity back? So the investor is making a real investment in this case with the potential that this company, In Return Strategies, they're essentially just investing in this company as a great idea. And part of the reason I wanted to mention this is because there were a whole bunch of graduate students that I talked to today that have really great ideas, like Hedda and James, for their portal that's going to help people with social communication difficulties. And I think they could scale that idea and really have an impact for a lot of people, but not without some kind of private capital and investment. It will take them too long. The other thing that was, I think, very effective about this particular model is it's not a very crowded space in the market. I think if there are a whole lot of people trying to do this, the platforms that are doing this are Monster.com, some big employment side. but without any tailoring or knowledge about the needs of people with disabilities. So that you have to have this specialized knowledge. So for all of you with those big and innovative ideas, I think these are good things to think about how you could attract some private investment capital. Okay, the last area that I wanted to talk about, prizes and competitions. What role prizes and competitions can play as we think about bringing equity. So this is a project that we were able to participate in Utah called the American Dream Ideas Challenge. The American Dream Ideas Challenge is funded by a philanthropist. His name is Eric Schmidt. Eric Schmidt was a CEO of Alphabet, the parent company of Google. So now returning money through philanthropy. He issued a national call, and his national call was, he is worried about the long-term vibrancy of the middle class. Middle class in America is sort of defining American values and futures. And his theory is, or his concern, is that what we're seeing is increasing income inequality, divide between wealthy and not wealthy. His American Dream Challenge was, I would like universities, public research universities who want to participate to bring forward ideas for sustaining the middle class long term. He picked 4 universities. They were University of Wisconsin, Ohio State, University of Utah, and Arizona State. We loved it. We got to be part of this. So each institution did its project in a different way. We said, we're going to get our best ideas from the people who are producing change, who are in action. So instead of a top-down approach, Wisconsin took a more top-down approach. We took a more bottom-up approach. We got 152 submissions from groups of people, educators, special educators. This is one of the submissions. And this submission was about individuals with autism and connecting. They use the word autists, which I think is relatively new language, recognizing the strengths of people with autism as really an important characteristic. And that's what they've done in this project. And they've said, how do we amplify strengths and move people into employment that's a perfect fit for the unique strengths that they have? So the American Dream Ideas Challenge brought forward all these great ideas. This one actually did not get funded, but I wanted to, we gave it some seed funding, I'm not sure. But the project that did get funded then gets to compete on a national level for $1 million prize, and this work is still going on. This is a great project with a lot of potential. And this project is about underemployment in people with autism and how we can creatively amplify strengths and bring people into employment. So I'll give you a couple examples from here in the social impact universe. So this is Utahns and unemployed individuals with autism, or autists, and employed. And you can see this is a very striking figure about the challenges in employment for autists and really being a critical societal issue. And if you think about lifting people and maintaining a middle-class lifestyle, this is a pretty important target of moving and keeping people in a middle-class life. This is part of the project. It's called Neurodiversity, and Neuroversity, I think, is the name of the website. And it's about amplifying strengths that people with autism have. So part of this project was using technology, particularly 3D modeling, as a way to amplify the strengths of individuals with autism, help those individuals use those strengths in design, construction, and a variety of very complex workforce, which many of us do not have visual spatial strengths to succeed, but many autists do have those strengths. And it has been a very interesting journey. I want to give credit to the people that are part of this, Cheryl and Scott Wright from Family and Consumer Studies, and then the Autism Futures is Bill McMahon, who's a psychiatry professor, and Kathy Chambliss, I think, from occupational therapy. So a remarkable kind of group of people thinking about how can we use a prize and a competition that's been put out to amplify our idea. And while that was not the winner of the big prize, they have attracted entrepreneurial support and funding, because this is a very entrepreneurial idea that, much like others in the room are thinking about, something that could move forward using the 3D modeling. And there's a variety of the employers that they have been working with this project. So I think that I would like to challenge you all with thinking about how some of these social impact models could be extended to the work you do. Whether it's through technology, whether it's through a social impact bonding and a pay for success kind of model, whether it's through innovation and discovery, but ways that private capital could accelerate what you're doing, could help you scale up the good ideas that you have, could join with you with philanthropy potentially, and make some of these ideas a reality. I was very heartened today by the maybe 30 or so graduate students who were with us at 9 o'clock this morning, because what I could see is enormous potential. And the future that you younger folks have, this is going to really help you move things along. And some of it is because of the access to private capital, and of course there are lots of philanthropists that want to be part of social change. The other thing that I think will help you accelerate is technology. The opportunity to do more with tech platforms that were not as accessible in the early days that some of us were beginning in these fields. So I think I really want to leave you with that challenge. I think I'm going to stop talking and see what kinds of questions and comments you have. So.